Hi, everybody, and welcome to the weekly Tulsa World Opinion section podcast video. And I am Jenny Graham. I'm the editorials editor.
Bobby Sett, editorial writer and columnist.
And welcome. And we are going to kick this off with the most explosive story, the biggest wedge issue of our time, abortion. So I don't think I think everybody now knows that there was a leaked document out of the Supreme Court that shows the court is poised to overturn Roe v. Wade, which is almost the same age as I am. So almost 50 years old. And, when this came out as the editorial editor, I wanted to see what positions our editorial section has taken through the years. And for at least the last 30 to 40 years, they've not taken a position. And what we've always said as a board is the Oklahoma law needs to follow the court guidance, federal law. And under Roe, the state doesn't always do that. When we pass all these unconstitutional bills, well, that might change. And so I started calling around to different, I need to call Ken Neal. So if Ken Neal's listening, and I'm sure Ken Neal, who's 80 and a longtime editorial editor, is listening, I'm sure he could weigh in. But to my knowledge, I think even before Roe, there was no position by the Tulsa World taken on abortion itself. So it's always been handled through columns, op-eds, and letters. And, I've always kind of thought no one's mind is going to be changed on this because it's been couched in religious thought, philosophical thought.
Yeah.
And even I'm, it's not a yes or no, on or off, black or white. There's so much nuance that it's hard in this political climate to talk about that nuance. But certainly with this right now, there is a political context in the midterms.
Yep.
And I know, Bob, you and I were talking a little bit about what that looks like. And so what's your take on how this will play out nationally and even locally?
Yeah. So I think in, these thoroughly red states like Oklahoma, I don't see it having much of an impact on statewide races. There may be a few legislative races and things like that where it is a bigger issue in bluer districts like the one that I live in. But, for a lot of the South and the interior West, probably not as much of a political impact. But when you get into those purple states, the battleground states, the timing of the leak is such that there is a lot of run-up time now for people who want to campaign on this issue. They're going to say that, we need a federal law to protect pro-choice, the pro-choice standard, whatever, what I'm saying about that, to protect the rights for people to have an abortion. And it is something you can make some hay with in terms of campaigning, in terms of fundraising and everything like that. When you look at the midterms, it's usually a bad time for the party in power. Right now, that's kind of how it was looking, because you're going to see a depressed voter turnout from Democrats. That's up in the air now, because there are going to be a lot of people who are very motivated by this. It's not saying that the women's vote is monolithic. It is not. But there are going to be people now who might have not been as excited about this election who are definitely going to turn out now. So we'll see how that looks in terms of polling coming in the next month or so, how that looks. But I would say right now, more than in the past, definitely appears that the Democrats could be in play again in a different way than what we've seen before.
It's interesting you mentioned polling. I'd like to see more information on how Oklahomans really feel, because a lot of Oklahomans will say, I'm pro-life, but, and to me, if there's a but after that, it means there's some choice you're willing to allow, whether that's rape, incest, and rape and incest are not exemptions in our Oklahoma law. So if Roe is overturned, it bans everything except the life of the mother. And even now, according to what I'm hearing from some hospital officials, there's a chilling effect going on for women who do require a DNC. A lot of doctors are like, are you sure? Are there other ways? I mean, it has a chilling effect. And so I'd like to see more work on, I know that the lawmakers are big on all over the vast majority, but I don't know. I've always sort of, the last poll I saw it's probably been a decade or 15 years old, but it showed Oklahoma being more split, that when you dig down into, I'm pro-life, but well, those are important exemptions.
There are shades of gray in this, for sure.
Well, and the other report that I put it back out, I wrote it in December, which was Oklahoma collects an incredible amount of data on women who get abortions in our state. And no one, I mean, it's available online. No one writes on it. And I was struck that most of the women have had children before. Most of the reasoning are money, that they're broke, they're concerned. There are some issues in there of forcible rape. It's a fascinating look, and it's an important look. Now, I've had one person say, doesn't matter the reasons, you're murdering babies. Okay, got to get past that rhetoric, because the reasons are important. Because if we want to bring down abortion, and it has decreased in Oklahoma 50% in the last 20 years, but those reasons are important because we had to prevent it. And that 50% decrease coincides when programs like the Take Control Initiative popped up, and that gives the long acting contraception to low income women. That made a huge difference in areas where evidence-based sex education programs were given to teens. That came down. When they had programs giving contraceptions to teens for free, it came down. So we see some of these programs work to bring it down. So to me, that's going to be, and we have an op-ed this weekend too, dealing with it. One from Tony Lowinger, who's been the chairman of Oklahomans for Life forever. And he talks about, that journey, and that, there's still work to be done. And he kind of explained a little bit as to what this ruling is. The other's from Laura Bellis, and she's with the Take Control Initiative. And she talks about how this is going to bring up the importance of things like emergency contraception, Plan B, that we need to, preserve that right. Because there's a real question of what's next. Are they going to go after, what's the next wedge issue when it comes to women? And I think it's going to be contraception.
That could be.
You had a different theory. What do you think the next big?
Oh my goodness. Well, when you look at the draft, kind of the summary that Justice Alito wrote, he mentioned something that I thought and many thought was very curious, very interesting, was the fact that there's nothing in the Constitution written about abortion. And using that as a pillar of supporting your reasoning behind your ruling, behind your opinion, there's a lot of stuff that's not in the Constitution. I mean, a lot. And some stuff that has been very recently decided by the court. There's not a lot of talk in the Constitution about marriage. So are we going to start looking at how, who can get married? That's something that we decided, I think, going back about 8 years.
Something like that, yeah.
Are we talking about maybe Obergefell being overturned? Technically speaking, and oddly enough, I've heard people talk about this, Congress people talk about this, that same right to marry who you wish according to race.
The loving
interracial marriage is not talked about in the Constitution. Now, I don't think people are going to go after that, because there's a lot of people who have married across racial spectrums, and it's just kind of a ridiculous thing to be thinking that, oh yes, we should codify in the law outlawing that. I think we're beyond that, at least I hope so. But if your reasoning is that hardcore originalist, that no, it's not written in the Constitution, so we can't say this is a constitutional right whatsoever, Oh boy, that
Yeah,
puts a
well, there's
lot
also
of things
nothing in
out
there
there.
about vaccines. And so
Yeah,
the same thing that allows the anti-vax movement to get a stranglehold, that's out the window. So, that whole fight, ironically, would be affected by it. So, I
yeah.
just, you know, I want to go back, and I'd read at one point a lot of the reporting that was done pre-Roe. You have to go back into our archives physically and get the old
Yeah.
paper. And I remember Janet Pearson was one of the reporters who wrote those original stories. Pat Atkinson, I think, was one of them, who was an editor when I first started. And it was not pretty. It was the reporting of what women went through pre-Roe was harsh. And if that's the world we're returning to, I fear for that. And I don't know what the plan is to avoid that, but I do think there will be what I would call abortion tourism happening, that women
Yeah.
with means are going to get in a car and drive to Denver, or get on a plane and go to New York. And the women who can't, they're going to be here. So there's
Yeah.
a lot there to prepare for and to talk about, but it's certainly not the end of it. But also this week we had some editorials and a few, I like all of our editorials, but there are a few that stand out.
Mhm.
And one of the issues we took on was it was a story that didn't originate with us. It came from the Oklahoma Watch and the Frontier. And it looked at a contract on the Bridge the Gap program, which was an education program created, one of the 5 created with Governor Stitt's money for pandemic aid for education. And he spent, one of those programs spent $10 million to give private school vouchers, which we disagreed with at the time. But this other was $8 million for Bridge the Gap. And it was to give low-income families, and I'm trying to remember the amount of the grants, but grants for things like tutoring, computer equipment, curriculum, and I think that like teaching supplies, something like that.
Yeah.
So, but what we found is that the contract was completely without oversight, that families were spending it on stereo car equipment, power washers,
TVs.
500 some odd TVs, it's just smart watches. I mean, there were no holds on it. And this education secretary, Ryan Walters, was in charge of the program. And there were some emails that showed that when the vendor asked, are there limitations? He said, no, blanket approval on all vendor platforms. Well, that was a real loss of an opportunity there to first have oversight, guidance, and supervision. So, the governor has said he's going to go after the money that's owed. The vendor is saying, no, this was the state's problem because the state didn't put any limitations. We're just a pass through. But there were some other issues with that contract too, that it was supposed to go through a certain nonprofit. It didn't. But this is just, there's a pattern emerging. This comes after the Swadley's barbecue contract, same deal, no oversight, out of control spending. But even on the pandemic side, we spent how much money on PPE that never arrived? I don't even know.
I think it was like 5 million or
like
something
5 million.
like that.
And then the hydrochloroquine, I'm saying that wrong.
Yeah.
We spent, $2 million on that to stay on the shelves. A pandemic center that did open, but it opened late and kind of a rocky start. And so the governor's been good about, after the fact, saying, I'm going to go get the money, we're going to recoup it. But it's always harder to do it that way than to just from the outset know that your procedures are being followed, because it looks like the allegations are the state's own bidding processes, and these are all sole source, no bid contracts, but our own state guidance isn't being followed.
Yeah.
So, anything stuck. I mean, it was good reporting, but it's frustrating at the same time.
Well, it does. It's like you said, it does show a pattern. There are some things I'm sure that the governor will be touting about his administration for reelection in terms of successes and stuff. But there's a lot of explaining to do between all of the things that you've been talking about just now. Do show a lack of oversight. And I don't know if it's a type of thing where these are like, hey, this is a good deal for everyone, let's just do it like that, right or wrong. or if it's just a lack of knowledge and not learning from past mistakes. Either way, none of it's good. And how that falls out to voters, I'm not totally sure.
I'd like to see some personnel held accountable, because through this, it's like, we're going to get the money back, but then I would like to see more of this, the systems. Well, who dropped the ball? What's going to be done differently? Because it seems to be repeated. So I'd like to see more on that end. But another story that I think was a really good story about that time, Andrea Eager, our reporter at the Tulsa World, she followed a story where a killer cop from, I believe, 1982 was about to be paroled to the Tulsa streets. And this was a notorious crime back at the day. He stalked this, you probably know the details better than I do, but he had a friend who was in a custody dispute with a woman, and he ended up stalking her for months, meticulously planning her death. He was a police officer. He ended up ambushing her after work with a poison tipped crossbow, and she died 6 days later in a hospital. But this is a guy who uses cop training to try to cover up his crime, then fled. It was a notorious crime, but somehow the parole board votes 4-0 to parole him. The governor's office approves it, and had it not been for Andrea's story, he'd be out. And the DA did his job when he went to the parole hearing, and this guy was denied parole in 2013. The DA gave all the same evidence. The victim's family said, and this guy, my first reaction was, what happened to focusing on nonviolent drug offenders? Those are the ones we want to get off the streets. I mean, these kind of unrepentant, killer cops. No. So, I don't know what more to say about that. I mean, what do you think, Bob? I read that sort of incredulously, and my first reaction was, does it still have people to help him?
It was a wild turn of events, because, going through that entire process of how it went down, I would like to know what was in the parole board's minds when they voted unanimously to give this guy parole. I know he's older. I don't know if that played a fact, and they said something to the fact that they thought that there was another suspect out there who did the crime for Mr. Stoller.
Yeah, but that was only by Stoller's allegation,
right?
Not actual evidence, which is what the DA brought up at the parole hearing.
And when you look at some of the things that the DA's office brought up, this guy was not exactly sorry for what he did. He bragged about it. He joked about it. He fled the state once he realized he was being looked at as a suspect. This guy behaved like a guilty person all the way through. And it's like you said, in 2013, we went through this process, and the governor at the time, Mary Fallin, said, no, this guy is staying put. I wonder if a close eye was being kept on this, because you can't treat a murderer in a parole hearing the same way you would treat somebody that was caught with an 8-ball or some scales and some residue in their car or something like that from drugs. It's not the same. This is a different thing, and this was not a heat of passion type of crime. It wasn't like, oh my gosh, this lady, I don't like her, and just turns into a spontaneous assault that leads to her death. That was not the case. This was a hit. That's what this was. This was a hit. And when you look at that kind of a thing, you got to wonder, how closely was the governor's office looking at this? And what do they learn from this now? Because we know, based on what the DA told us and what the victim's family members that we talked to told us, he walks, if not for our reporting. He's out, and then it's too late. Now, I'm totally stoked that we had somebody like Andrea who got on this and reported it as well as she did. She did a great job. These are really well-written stories, very well dug into. But should it come to that? No. I'm glad we're here to do it, but
I don't think Governor Stitt would have released him knowing what we know. I mean, I truly think he would have kept him in. I think there's some people around him or in that office that dropped the ball. And that's what I mean by the systems are not, there's something going on that's not hitting. It's not
right
working as smooth as it should or as it has, because, you know, he's big on second chances and criminal justice reforms, but for the drug offenders and the nonviolent people, not for murders. It just seems like if you're the person in charge of on behalf of the governor to review these things and something says murder on the jacket, well, you might want to like tag that one and like, you know what, he's not going to want to release this guy. So
or at least dig into it a little deeper.
Exactly.
You know, because not all murders are created equal either, and some people do change and some people might actually be fit, but the vetting process for that cannot be it cannot be what it is for other offenders. It just can't. And the information that was there about this case, it's not hidden. It's all over the district court files. It's all over the internet. If you want to do some Google searching on this guy, you're going to find our stories. This was a dude that did not need to be let out. You know, the jury gave him a life sentence when that was the only option at that time. And that's what they gave him. They wanted him in prison for the rest of his life.
The other editorial we wrote about was the bill that Governor Stitt signed, and it had to do with adjunct teachers. And I changed my mind on this one. I think the board came around too, because as a board and myself personally, I don't want to put more untrained teachers in classrooms. I think it's demoralizing for staff. I think it waters down professional standards, and it's not good. Unfortunately, Oklahoma has now gotten to the point where we are so desperate to keep doors open, we can't find people to work in our classrooms. And so we're at a crisis. I mean, all the data from emergency certifications to everything shows that, you know, we're hurting. So the adjunct teachers are different from emergency certified. Adjunct teachers tend to be specialists in an area like accounting, American Sign Language, or a certain trade. And so the law allows for the school districts to approve that person for that trade to teach a class on that subject. So if you are know American Sign Language and they want to offer that class, they can hire you, and you're exempt from but you're limited to a certain amount of hours per semester. So the idea was never that these adjunct teachers would be full-time teachers, that they would be limited. Like, you are going to teach an accounting class, you're going to teach whatever. So what this law does is lift that restriction of hours. So now you could have a school full of adjunct teachers and they don't have any certifications. They have no training in teaching. And that, I was against it, but then some of the teachers and some of the administrators were for it on a short-term basis, because in order to if we were going to right now try to get a bunch of teachers into our teaching colleges, it would still be 4 years from now before we'd realize that, you know, teaching pool. So we need a stopgap right now, and this will help with that, but is by no means the answer. So, you know, we sort of editorially went along with it and said, okay, we're going to support it, but not long-term, because what will happen is we're going to have a bunch of untrained teachers. And to be clear, for people who don't know about teaching, there is so much more to know than just the subject area. I know I can't manage a classroom of 30 teenagers, but I know people who are trained in things like child development and classroom management and learning styles who can. Those are the kind of things we want. So that was the other one we went out on. And we also this Sunday are writing a story or a column and an editorial on homelessness. And this has been a big issue for us, and we dug into it a little bit more. The editorial looks at a specific case that we wrote about last Sunday where a downtown worker was attacked. And the perpetrator, who pleaded guilty and got a 20-year sentence, he had at least 30 interactions with law enforcement. And it's just felony, attack. And this woman, I mean, he was kicking her head into the concrete and people had to intervene. This is 3 o'clock in the afternoon and she's a hotel worker. And I want to be clear that we are not talking about all people who are homeless. We are addressing a very small subset of people who are being failed by our systems.
Yes.
They are homeless, chronically homeless. They have significant mental health challenges, and it is a revolving door between law enforcement, prison, sometimes mental health facilities, and nothing seems to help. And
it's a turnstile.
It is. And I remember years ago, I read a story. It was a national story, and it was called $1 Million Murray. And it profiled a man named Murray. I forget, somewhere like Philadelphia or Boston or somewhere. And they showed that he was costing the community, it was $1 million, because he was just in and out of, hospitals and jails, and he was still, and nothing changed. And they're like, this was a 25-year-old story. And at the time, homeless advocates were like, we've got to stop this. Well, here we are, it's 20 some odd years later, and we're still doing it. And again, I know a lot of advocates don't want us to talk about it because they don't want to stereotype all people as being aggressive or being mentally ill, and we're not. But we have to be real that this group, it's not humane to those people, and it's not good for public safety.
No.
And we've got to do better. And so you wrote a companion column that I want every single person to read. It is so good. And it's a personal story of your interaction with the gentleman who is homeless. And you said there were a little bit in there about you didn't get a chance to put in the column that you want to talk about the process of how that came about.
Sure. So a few years back, I live in a neighborhood that is right by downtown. So we see homeless folks fairly frequently. And just like you said, most of it's pretty benign. Every now and then you do have some troublemakers, but that's the minority. Anyway, I met a person who was kind of in trouble and tried to figure out how to help this person, and just kind of getting into their story a little bit, and just trying to help this young person get back home, because that's what he wanted to be. He'd been out on the street. He'd had enough. He wanted to get back home. So I wrote a bunch of stuff out after it was done. I was going to publish it on a blog site that I run, and I just decided not to do it. I'm kind of don't like anything that could be construed as, hey, I did a good thing and blah, blah, blah. I didn't want to do that. So I set it aside. And then this stuff came up that you're talking about. And I was like, this is an opportunity to kind of use what you knew then and combine it with what we're talking about now, and look at how we are not serving these people, these folks that don't have a place to go. We're not serving them well at all. We say we care, but do we? I don't know. This was a while back, and when I was going to publish it, I was going to do it where I kept the guy's real name out of it. So I had a kind of a pseudonym for him just to protect his identity. It's been enough years that I don't even remember what the guy's real name is anymore. But I do remember writing this out when it was fresh on my mind, the conversations that we had, the interactions we had, and everything like that. So it is a very personal story, and but it's just one story of many that we see dealing with homelessness, the many factors that are putting people on the street, and the difficulty that we're having in actually solving this problem. We've had discussions as an editorial board about how we need to get not just the advocates and local government officials and law enforcement to look deeper into this, but the entire community. The entire community needs to start giving a dang about all of this. And so far, I don't believe we're passing that test. So when we see the assault outside of that hotel, when we see some of the bad things that I've seen in my own neighborhood, and also when we just see people who are out there suffering, it just kind of shows that, we're talking some talk, but we're not really walking the walk in terms of really doing something to help.
Right. And I think what we're doing is trying to start this conversation and throwing out the challenge that we have a lot of programs in Tulsa, and some do very well, but
Yeah.
there's just this small group, but unfortunately it's an aggressive group. That's a group that lives in their own reality, and they're not really meant for prison. They're not, we don't have mental institutions necessarily. And even to get someone committed is a very high bar, and it has to do with being an immediate threat to yourself and others, which is very high. But there is a group of people out there that we know where they're headed, and what can we do? And I don't know the answer, because then you don't know the answer, but I think we can come together and come up with something better. And it's not, again, this is not most of people who are homeless. And I think the programs that we have, but they're not working for this group, and we've got to do better. And so I want this to be hopefully the first of several columns, op-eds. I want letters. I mean, we'd like for this, Tulsa can deal with this. We can have solutions, but we have to do better. So, but I would encourage everyone to read that this weekend. I loved your column. So my column is Mother's Day. My mom's going to be very happy. My mom loves it when I write about her, no matter what I write about her. So she has an ego like that. So, but no, I love moms. And I know that a lot of people out there don't have a mom to celebrate with for whatever reason, but I just try to encourage them. I get it. I don't have a dad to celebrate Father's Day, but we all have mother figures. We all have father figures. And so on this day, you might take a moment and either, celebrate with your mom, call your mom, tell her how much she's awesome, even though you might roll your eyes at some goofy thing she does, or just remember those that did help raise you. So, and I hope everyone does have a good weekend this weekend.
Your mom sounds fun.
She is a lot of fun. She's a lot of fun around happy hour. She gets very talky. She loves to dance. I have lots of videos of people will send me videos of my mom dancing. It's like, okay.
Love it. Your mom sounds pretty rad.
I hope I'm like that. I want to be the old lady dancing on the dance floor although she's listening to like the Beach Boys, I guess I'll be listening to Nirvana. Will Pearl Jam be like the golden oldies? Are they the golden oldies now? Oh my God, I didn't even think of that. We're 50.
Can't dance the Pearl Jam anyway.
I can dance I did dance a Pearl Jam. Best concert, one of the best concerts. I actually can say I saw Pearl Jam in 1993. So,
I'm kind of jealous of that.
You know what's funny about that? Nirvana was in town just like a month or two before, but I couldn't afford the $20 to go.
Oh my gosh.
I'll catch him the next time around. Well, so now I try not to miss concerts that I want to go to, but
they're not $20 anymore.
I would say I had to. God, the U2 concert just about broke me, but it was worth it. All right. Hey. Well, you have a good weekend, Bob. Anything else you want to add?
Well, I would say, because I always say stuff about getting outside and junk like that, next few days, if you're a mountain biker or a runner, do not go to the trails. They're super muddy right now, and it'll just do damage. So give those trails at least a couple of days to dry out before you go out and ride. And go visit your mom, go have lunch or dinner with your mom. If she's not in town, give her a call, tell her how awesome she is, make her feel good. I know I'll be doing that because my mom is awesome, and I've got no problem telling that to anybody. So,
I want to meet your mom someday. That's going to happen.
She's rad. She's awesome.
Well, everybody have a good weekend, and we'll see you next week.
Adios.
Bye.